Hello and welcome to the Voice of the Field podcast by Brown and Hurley Agriculture. Join us as we explore the heart of Australian agriculture and construction, sharing stories from the paddocks, workshops and more. You will hear from our knowledgeable Brown and Hurley agricultural staff, valued customers, farmers, operators and the suppliers and manufacturers driving innovation in our vital industry. Now let's dig in. This is our very first episode and we're kicking things off with a very special guest, our General Manager of Agriculture, Brian Praetz. Brian brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table, not only as one of the leaders of Brown and Hurley Agriculture, but also as someone deeply connected to the industry, having a farm himself back in WA and also previously operating trucking and construction companies. In this episode, we'll dive into his vision for the future of agriculture, the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead within our industry, and how he manages to balance a unique life between the farmland and the boardroom. Now let's get started. So now, Brian, if I'm not mistaken, you have a farm yourself. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we're wheat and sheep farmers, well, traditionally wheat and sheep farmers in central wheat belt of WA, and still have the farm. But I farmed it for many years, but I got it as a mature age person, got it in my 40s, so always had a passion for being a farmer. So, yeah.
Where do you think that passion came from? Is it from your family or is it...
I think that I was brought up in a country town. My father was a builder and all my mates were farming kids and they always seemed to have little motorbikes and knew how to drive cars and I don't know, had all this exciting lifestyle, but as a town kid... I don't know. I seem to be deprived of that.
Right,
So I love tractors and all of those sort of things. So they seem to have a far more enviable life than what I had.
Oh yeah. Do you have a particular tractor you've always wanted to get and you've never been able to reach out for?
Yeah, well, that's a good question because I, at a very early age, would have been 12, I learned to drive a 1958 Chamberlain Super 70 tractor. So I would have been 12. And I've always loved those machines. We are Case IH New Holland dealers, so Chamberlain is really a part of the John Deere fold, but the Chamberlain tractor that I learned was a 3-cylinder GM, extremely noisy, and I loved it. And believe it or not, I've got one as a collector's item. So I had a passion for old-time tractors.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, funny you mentioned that because I was actually going to ask you next. What type of machinery do you have at your farm?
Okay, so when I was farming, because I'm an international harvester mechanic by trade, I always opted for red tractors. I've genuinely really enjoyed, and I suppose when you're in the machinery game, you get a bias. So some people are John Deereites, but I'm a real Case IH international harvester man. So I collect some of those tractors. So I've got a collection of 1970 model tractors, international harvester tractors. And when I was farming, I had Magnums and I had a Steiger and an Actual Flow. So I was very much a red man.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear.
Absolutely.
Okay. I guess now, can you share us some of your biggest lessons you've learnt as a farmer and now, I guess, as the general manager of Brown and Hurley Agriculture?
Yeah, well, I suppose if you look at the contrast with agriculture, agriculture is very seasonal. Agriculture is dependent on many factors, i.e., the weather, commodity cycles for either inputs or what you're producing. So from those predicaments, you're not really generally in control of what the outcomes may be. So when you're farming, you really need to be professional at what you're doing in your skill set, but there's a lot of things you can do really, really, really well that at the end of the day, through no fault of your own, i.e. weather conditions, storms, whatever they may be, have a detrimental impact or a positive impact, can really enhance yields. Whereas a general manager, look, in principle, you're dealing with human beings.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with staff, you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with suppliers. So there's a whole conduit of different interactions you have with people that can very much vary. And I've found as I've got older, especially since COVID, people have become far more challenging to manage.
Yep.
When I grew up, it was sort of like a clip under the ears, and if you had a sickie, you'd better explain why, and you'd mostly get a clip under the ears. Where today, I think the workplace is, maybe for the right reasons, mostly far more flexible, it's far more empathetic, it's far more supportive of staff to try and provide a service, i.e. being a dealer, in regional areas is mostly challenged because people aren't necessarily now, what would you say, orientated to wanting to live regionally. And then the issues of living regionally where, i.e. if you live in the city, you've got access to theatres and cinemas and good shopping and all that, where regionally you don't have that. So I think one of the challenges for a dealership is trying to, one, attract people but then retain them in these country towns, because I've had some really good staff over the years, but as soon as their kids get to high school or university, they tend to move back to where those facilities are, and you're not going to get those in country towns.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, even myself, talking to some of our staff, you get that when you talk to them about their children.
Yeah.
We actually have one of our staff members who's they work out with construction equipment, and then their son actually works in the United Kingdom working on AI with Google. So
yeah, right, there you go.
It's a completely different world. And
it's amazing, isn't it?
Jazz. Yeah.
We're a global community when it comes to the workplace.
Yeah. I guess, talking about tech, how have any innovations in the agricultural machinery and technology impacted your work currently on your farm?
Yeah, so if you look at agriculture, I would have thought technology-wise, we look at the advancements with electric cars, or just travel, whether it be aviation improvements. If you go and look at agriculture, if I look at the agronomy side, i.e. the way that we go and grow a crop, is totally different. We use knife points, we use far more different methodologies to go and retain moisture, harvest moisture. So as a dryland farming continent, we are exceptionally, exceptionally developed with our technologies, whether it be agronomic inputs, i.e. the chemicals we use, some of the insecticides we use, but also the mechanisation, like some of the farm machinery that we sell is extremely modern. Its applications are about really looking after soil biodiversity, really looking after the biology of the soil, really trying to make as less disturbance on our soil, and the footprint at the same time not being disturbed. Where when I grew up, it was mostly far more intrusive what we did to the elements. We worked the land more severely. We created a lot of degradation, a lot of erosion. We mostly dissipated a lot of the moisture, dissipated a lot of the fertility of the ground. So I think in the last 30 years that I've really witnessed that we disturb the soil less. The way that we put stuff in the ground is far different than what we used to in the old days. And the technology that drives the tractors, drives the implements, manages the implements, the variable rate technologies, all of the technologies that we now adopt in agriculture, I think are just world class. From a farming perspective, the machinery is exceptionally developed in the fact of guidance, the way that we actually go and apply chemicals, how the way we can, nurture the ground through deep ripping, through moldboarding, through rotation, whatever that may be. All that equipment is only in the last 30, 40 years. So the John Deeres, the C&Hs, the Agcos have done some really fantastic development with equipment that I go, wow, it's hard to believe these machines have been evolved so quickly, and the technological changes have brought tremendous improvements in yield and outputs and profitability at a per hectare basis. So it's been amazing transition even in my lifetime. Yeah,
it's quite, isn't it? Even getting that, somehow still maximising, our potential to grow and,
absolutely.
As a crop and as businesses grow and stuff like that. Also, being able to push out that sustainability more and more. I guess on that, what practices have you implemented to maintain, your soil health and manage resources efficiently?
Yeah, well, I suppose if I look at my personal journey, and I would be nowhere near as advanced as what I see a lot of people who participate in agriculture. But if I look in my journey, like soil health, pH levels, accessibility to your trace elements, gateways to fertility, soil retention, erosion control, all of those things I've seen really, really improved. I see there's wetters now that we use to actually hold the molecular structure of the soil, so whatever moisture is attracted there is actually held.
Yep.
If I go and look at the fertilities in the old days, liming, for example, you'd have acidity issues in the soil, and you'd think you've run out of moisture, where it was actually the plant couldn't access the fertility in the soil. So all of those biological agronomic improvements have really made some real fundamental changes. And then the machinery that we put in the ground with, like some of that has been just mind blowing. Watching it, how like when I was younger, like paddocks would blow. After they'd been harvested, like the wind, just mild wind would erode. Where today I don't see erosion to the degree that you did back in those days. The soil condition, if you go and get a shovel full of soil in many farms, like it's beautiful, it's quite rich, it's got a lot of organic matter in it. We're going back when I grew up, no, that didn't exist. We used to work the soil, work it back, harrow it, used to really get it quite fine. Where today's agriculture and the machinery that does it is very much guarded against that. So it's about, really not trying to disturb the soil as much as really trying to hold the molecular structure. So, organically, I think we've got a better growing environment. And I think from a farming perspective, I think most farmers would be recognising that land's a one-off. There's no more of it produced. So therefore, to go and produce more, you've got to produce more on what you've got. So I don't think, there's often claims that farmers are a bit negligent with soil management. Well, I don't actually get that, and the fact that farmers have a vested interest to make sure the fertility, the condition of their soil, the conditions of their farm are in A1 conditions, and my evidence that I see when I'm driving along, whether it be any part of Australia or even overseas, is that farmers are genuine in regards to the protection of their soils. So and I've been a big one on that. Soil pH levels, acidity management, biological management within the soil structures. They've always been an active part of my thinking, and like many other farmers, like it's hot on their agenda.
Yeah. I guess you actually told me about it a bit earlier today, how you actually won an award about that.
Yeah, so going back a few years ago, I did some pH testing and then correlated that to yield. So and that was to do with basically soil fertility through pH levels. And that was really about gateways of plants through their root structure actually being able to access the trace elements in the soil. And a lot of those soils and where those trace elements are further deeper in the soil profile. So from a perspective of learning, I won a grant and I did some experiments and actually won an award for some of the soil management practices. So and I did apply those through my farming years. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I guess in the next 5 or 10 years, where do you see your farm going?
Well, I see in the next 10 to 15 years, it'll be more about where I'm going. I think the challenges will be that the farm will be there for forever and ever.
Yeah.
And I suppose my view of it was that the farm that we bought, I really hope and genuinely, that we transition that to whoever that may be, whether it's family or other buyers, that the farm that I started with is better than the farm that I hand over. And I think most farmers would have that view. But I think in the next 10 years to 15 years of farming, I think you're going to see all sorts of practice changes, whether it be through equipment. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see autonomous tractors. I see more precision in regards to the way that we put our fertilisers in the ground, the way that we manage our costs. So I think machinery is going to mostly get a lot more complex, but mostly not rely on human beings. So I see a lot of console management, remote autonomous management of machinery, whether that be in broadacre or horticulture. I see a lot in the viticulture, in the Gatton Basin or, up in the Atherton Tableland, where those sort of technologies are being tried and in some cases are actually being applied.
Yeah.
Out in Roma, I see, and there's manufacturers in Emerald who have autonomous spraying machines that can go 24 hours a day, self-fill and go and self-apply. So I see technology really developing in that regards. And I think the larger manufacturers, the C&H's and the John Deere's will, and I don't know if they will develop, I think they have developed, and I think they'll really start redefining how that all works as far as application improvements and the autonomy of those machines operating independent of what is a scarce resource, which is labour.
Yeah. Do you find that to be kind of a similar trend for the construction industry, or is it mainly more for the agriculture?
My periods were industrial services and transport and logistics. I think if you look at truckmen, and we work for a truck reselling company, so if you look at the technology in trucks now, cost per kilometre, haulage rates per kilometre, all of those efficiencies now, even through this industry, would be, like significantly different than what they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. If you go and look at like battery power instead of diesel power, trying to look at emissions and the emission managements, the power ratios, getting traction, getting haulage economies. I think all of those are now evolutionary processes that I think are going to really get some momentum in the next 10 years in every single industry, not only agriculture.
Yeah, okay. I mean, even looking at the Brown and Hurley, the truck side of things, we're even looking into that kind of stuff ourselves, where we've got, I guess, looking into the autonomous trucks and how we can develop those with Kenworth and DAF. So it is quite interesting how that whole industry seems to be going.
Yeah, well, if you go and look at Rio Tinto, they operate, their trains in Western Australia in the Pilbara autonomously. If you go and have a look at West Angeles mine in the Pilbara of WA, that's a totally autonomous mine operated remotely, excavating equipment, dump truck equipment, all of those things. So I think every industry is really at the forefront of performing productive tasks minus the human, interactions.
Yeah.
And I think if I look at agriculture, where the human element is mostly going to be reduced even more, so I see machinery getting to size where huge scale, massive productivity capabilities, but minus the human content. So I think those things are transitionary, and I think in the next 20 years, the landscape for machinery will be very different than what it was, in the period where we are now, even compared to where I grew up. So when I grew up, 100 horsepower tractor was big. In my lifetime, four-wheel drive tractors were introduced, all-wheel drive tractors, which was, wow, like what are they? Where now we look at 700 horsepower tractors, 1,000 horsepower tractors, you're talking 60-foot comb fronts on combine harvesters, 80-foot seeding rigs. I see all of that even getting larger scale than that. I see farming land becoming really expensive right around the world because I think arable land is now becoming significantly in short supply. And I think with global, population growth, productivity per hectare of, productive ground anywhere on the planet is going to be in really absolutely hot demand. So I think where we are in agriculture, especially mechanisation, I think is going to be less dealers, less farmers. As a dealer, you've got to be more competent, and with a farmer, they're going to be mostly, I think, more commercial, operate big capital, but rely on service providers external of the farm to make sure their technical machinery and all the communications of that are really well supported. And I think that's the evolution where we are now.
Okay, well, I guess it can be a little grim for some people to see that way, but I guess that's that's how our industry goes.
Yeah, well, someone like your age, I think just exciting times. I'm 60, I go, wow, that's been wonderful to experience all of what I've witnessed. But I think the next part of the journey is even going to be like more wilder. So I think it's interesting times in agriculture, absolutely.
Okay, well, I guess on that, and I guess to wrap this up, I guess for young people interested in farming, what advice would you give them to start on, starting something or working now in agriculture? Yeah,
like if I look at, I look at our business, we're Farm Machinery Dealership, Case IH, New Holland, and we've got construction equipment. I find our business so interesting because we're a workshop, so if it's a trade, we're a technology shop. Like if it's to go and guide a machine or to go and have variable rate displacements and all that on your seeding equipment, if you go and look at the parts, we are really quite an interesting business. We provide a lot of parts for so many different areas of an operation. And then we have sales, and then we have the administration of all of that. And then you have the executive management. So I don't know many businesses more exciting than an agricultural farm machinery dealership. Many of them run in beautiful parts of the world. They operate with some absolute wonderful customers. Like farming customers are just absolute ground of the earth, down to earth people who, they have a high expectation, but they are really good quality folk. They're not corporate businesses. They are their risk. They are their businesses. So I think generationally, working with those folk, and I think as a young person coming into industry, I look at a lot of people trying to look at opportunities in the city, and I go, wow, the real skill set, the real value in that skill set as time evolves is going to be hugely valuable. So I think as time goes on, those who are working in that industry, they're going to be very well compensated. And I think the interesting thing is the technology movements and changes and transitions in this industry are so significant that'll be an exciting life. So I think it'd be a great area. And I always encourage and really enjoy talking to young people about, exactly that. So, yeah, it's a great industry.
Ah, awesome. Well, that's about all we've got time for today. But, yeah, I really appreciate you speaking to us here today, Brian. And,
Thank you, mate. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I hope you guys all enjoyed listening, and tune in next time for our next episode.
Good on you. Thanks again.
See ya.